This message is proudly sponsored by CO2 Meter.
Hello and welcome once again to the 1895 podcast with me, Thomas D.
And me, Rob Cockerell.
Rob, we said that these two episodes were coming quite quick succession, and we've stuck to that promise, haven't we? And as promised, we're going to get into that panel discussion from gasworld's North American CO2 Summit 2025 that we couldn't bring our listeners in the previous episode.
We are. Did you notice the last episode was 75? So this one means we're officially on the home straight towards a century of 1895 podcast episodes.
We're slowly getting there, but still a long way until we get to our 1895th episode.
Yeah, exactly. But let's not talk about that, Tom. Yeah, we could be very grey by then. But what a great episode to take us into that next batch of 25. I've said this a number of times before. These are my favourite parts of any of our events, the relatively unscripted panel discussion. This is where I sit down with my notebook and any audience Q&A, and we just chat with our guests.
And it's great to be able to bring this to our listeners today. And we're not going to have to do much of the heavy lifting on this 1895 episode because I want to ensure that our listeners get almost everything from this panel discussion, or everything that we can share.
Yeah, all the legwork done on the day, shall we say. And just for the context, this was our panel discussion to discuss, as you said, newcomers and new opportunities. This is where we wanted to put the spotlight on some of the new faces or actors in the industry, and also some of the new nuances around those hot topic areas like RNG or biomethane, like biogas and fuel cells, and all of the carbon capture and value chain opportunities. So yeah, that's what we were aiming to do.
I think that's enough from us today, because I really want to get into this episode and that fantastic panel that you had. A few returning faces and a few new ones. So let's rewind to you from the past.
Hello and welcome back to the final session of the day, and one of my favourite aspects of our events, our unscripted panel discussion. Our topics for the next 45 minutes, perhaps the hour, are the newcomers and new opportunities in this shifting market. We've heard a lot about those nuances in the past 48 hours and that need for creative destruction and all of the what-ifs that we really need to think about before it's too late. And now we'll pick up the baton of those discussions in this session. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by four experts in the field for this conversation, so please allow me to make their introductions. First of all, we have Erica Chase, who I'm sure needs no introduction after that hugely significant talk yesterday, but let's just remind ourselves of her background. Erica serves as president of CleanCycle Carbon, an EFI company, where she drives the company's strategic growth and oversees project development in the emerging biogenic CO2 industry. As we heard yesterday, CleanCycle Carbon has advanced a technology and business structure that makes even small-scale projects financially viable, unlocking new opportunities for resource recovery across the food and agriculture industry, and with some pretty exciting steps still to come in deployment. Next up, we have Ilir Tahiri, sales manager at Bright Renewables. Ilir helps US renewable gas developers unlock new revenue streams by integrating CO2 capture and liquefaction into RNG projects. As Bright's resident expert on CO2 technologies, he combines technical depth with commercial insight to advance the cause of the biogenic CO2 solutions nationwide. We also welcome back Bruce Warner, this time representing Vanguard Renewables. For a bit of context, Vanguard Renewables was founded in 2014 with three primary goals: to produce renewable energy, sustain farms for future generations, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Today, the company has a number of operational anaerobic digestion sites, several more under construction, and many more slated to begin construction. The company is on track to have comfortably more than 50 AD projects across the US by 2028. In fact, I've seen a much bigger number in the media in the last few days, and I'm hoping that Bruce can bring us up to speed on those credentials too. And it's also worth mentioning that Vanguard became a portfolio company of Global Infrastructure Partners, a part of BlackRock, in 2022. And last but by no means least, we also welcome another debutant to the gasworld stage with Forrest Churchill, Principal of Project Development at CANUSA. Forrest has over 15 years of experience in the development, execution and startup of industrial projects for the energy, industrial gas and specialty chemical sectors. His project execution team has been developing industrial CO2 projects for those ranging from 140 TPD to 1,000 TPD of CO2 capture. And you may recognize Forrest's name because he's been throwing in endless questions across the last 2 days. So he's a very engaged participant. Let's give him some questions in this session. Yeah. And on that note, please do send in any questions, and we will pause after a little while in this panel to get through some of those. So send them in. I'll be keeping my eye on that. So let's get underway by asking first. We'll ask our panel: how have you found the last couple of days, and what have you found most interesting of all the insights and all the talks we've heard? Erica, I'd like to come to you first while I take to my seat.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. It's been great to be here this week. I attended the conference last year in Nashville. We were still in our commissioning phase of our project in Lewiston. So we've made a lot of strides between last conference and this conference in our business. And I think what's been really great is how well received what we are doing has been, and that we are actually doing and have a project that's operational. And I think that's given us some credibility within the CO2 marketplace and opening the doors for more conversations from an offtake perspective.
Fantastic, thank you. And Bruce, I mean, you're a regular face at these events these days, but what's caught your eye in the last 2 days?
Rob, out of the 3 of these I've been invited to and I've attended, this is by far the best for me as far as networking, meeting people, learning things from the presentations. I thought Ivor's presentation was very eye-opening, a little bit different than our traditional CO2 and dry ice. Here's what's happening in the energy market, which is driving all this opportunity for fuel cells. And I've also just noticed so many people, I think, now come here because of that networking opportunity. And the infrastructure you set up was superb. It was very nice having all this space and the time and having the free afternoon on Tuesday. So compliments to gasworld. It's been very productive, enjoyable for me.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your contributions. And we're not done yet. Ilir, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's been a wonderful show, especially considering the interest in biogenic sources of CO2. I attended BevTech earlier this year, and that was a pretty hot topic there as well. Very interesting to hear about emerging markets, the energy production and clean fuels all kind of spidering in together. So it's been a bit of a homecoming too, seeing the ISBT beverage grade being thrown around in new sources. We've discussed the constriction on sources historically and kind of what's going on in the market. I think it's more apparent than ever that adding sources is a requirement to continue the growth that the CO2 industry is trying to have. And I know the ISBT is working hard on providing guidelines for that. So it seems the tipping point is now, and I think we're all well aware of it.
Fantastic, and hopefully we'll get into some of those tipping points in this conversation. Finally, Forrest, how have you found the last 2 days, apart from good Q&A sessions?
Well, I've had the privilege to do the Helium conference with gasworld, and very similar experience, right? I want to thank all the sponsors and exhibitors. They help make it possible, and the networking that happens with that. What we've seen, obviously, a little bit of a message around possibly it feels comfortable or static, right? The current overall market picture, but I think there's these opportunities that are developing to disrupt not only source, supply, but also the marketing, right? Just talking about dry ice marketing. How do you market a product that maybe is seen as a commodity? And so I think there's definitely opportunity for people to find their space in the CO2 market, and this is definitely a place to make those connections and talk about the challenges and insights we're getting.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for taking part and sharing your insights. Now, I'd like to, I guess, begin with you, Bruce. You've given us a great flavor of the whole RNG market. That's going to come a bit in this panel. So tell us more about RNG and this hot area, because from what you were saying, it seems like a really promising new opportunity.
I certainly think it's the most promising number one opportunity for us, Rob. And I was fortunate enough to be involved with a plant in Denmark, Wisconsin. So for a year and a half when I was at Airgas, we bought their product and we had access to the quality. So we would see every week, they would share the quality testing, the daily test, the batch testing, and it was superb. There was no issues with it. It could have been ISBT grade, so I think that gave us a confidence that ISBT, there's nothing wrong with it. I've spent enough time talking to Spectrum and all the massive amounts of data they have gotten from a vast number of RNG plants across the world that now lead me to believe that landfill is not going to be first, but I think landfill is very doable. You'll need additional cleanup equipment, catalytic oxidizers, but I think all of them are doable, and I think you get the sense, thank you, the research you did on Vanguard is superb. I don't really have much more to add other than it is such a pleasure to be with a dynamic company with deep pockets that's probably moving faster than they should. They're going in so many directions at once, but it was very refreshing to meet their senior management and have all of them say, CO2 is very important, it's critical to us. I've never had a source in my life tell me that. It's usually, I'll call you next week, we're pretty busy, CO2 is this much, but it's very valuable to them because they are targeting the IMO, which is the International Shipping Organization.
Maritime, yeah.
Maritime, that's the word I'm looking for, thank you. So in the shipping world, the ISCC is the body in Europe that approves the fuel, and to them, utilization is the same as sequestration. So you get the same reduction in CI for utilizing it as you would for sequestering it. So that's why they're so committed, and I think other companies will join as the regulations for the penalties and the taxes on shippers if they don't lower that. Ilir is shaking his head. Bright knows this all so well, and I would also add is, companies like Bright and a few of their competitors have been so good at adding these plants. As you know, in Europe, there are so many of them, and they've demonstrated that it's ready for prime time, and they add just one more option when you go to build a plant. You can integrate, as you have done, Erica, the upfront upgrading as well as the back-end purification and liquefaction, and it's just more optionality, especially in the smaller size ranges, which the Salos and the SEADs and the traditional manufacturers and the KISSO have focused on the bigger plants. So it makes it more economic to have 20, 40 ton a day plants, and of course 45Q helping all this with if you're big enough to qualify at a source. Probably more than you wanted to hear, but
no, absolutely.
I'll turn the floor over to others.
We want the free-flowing conversation. That's great. I was going to say I'm happy for you to correct me on the credentials of Vanguard. I mean, those deep pockets help, but they've got some big ambitions, right?
I mean, they're putting $2 to $3 billion into this, and I've heard some people in the industry say, we heard Vanguard was getting out of the business, and I think that comes from the fact, as you mentioned, they have 6 smaller plants in New England that are all organic waste. So instead of putting it in a landfill, all the food waste, they recently signed an agreement with IKEA, so all the restaurants will bring their food waste to them. And their vision is they've safe harbored at least 30 to 40 of these plants. The number seems to be fluid, so I don't know, it could be 50, it could be 500, but I think it's in that range. So a reasonable amount, and they're now looking at perhaps upsizing to maybe doubling to 40, 45 ton a day CO2 plants, so you get the 45Q credits, but they are very committed. They brought in a whole new management team in the last 10 months, and they brought me on to broaden their knowledge base of CO2.
Fantastic, and a great person they've onboarded there, Bruce. Now, this seems like a good time to come to you, Ilir. You're in the same space, this exciting space. So what is Bright Renewables' position or niche, and what have you got coming down the track?
Yeah, so Bright Renewables offers a variety of CO2-centric technologies from flue gas capture, as low as 5% CO2 possible with amine systems, PSA systems ranging from that 20% mark all the way to 90%, possible utility at landfills like Bruce was alluding to, using a PSA to boost some of those older landfill systems, more simplistic landfill systems that let a lot of methane slip through. On the liquefaction front, we've got about 20 liquefiers across Europe. As Rome mentioned yesterday, there's not a lot of forthcoming data on where they're selling to, kind of what's going on with those systems. So the rumors float around that they're selling into the beverage sector already in Europe, and kind of the U.S. is waiting for that to cascade to us. Bright's looking at plants all the way from 300 kilograms an hour all the way to 6,000, 6 tons an hour. So quite a range, all modular, scalable, containerized, and we've devised it to pair well with our upgraders. And you see in the tail gas stream from a 3-stage membrane upgrader, ours or our competitors, you can find 99+% pure CO2 just venting to atmosphere. And it's something that for years has been overlooked. There's been some interest, but the big hurdle for developers is connecting the gap between having the CO2, having all the technology, making the liquid, having it pure and analyzed, and actually getting it in the hands of an off-taker. So for us, we're trying to help leverage some of our experience in Europe. We own and operate some sites. We've done it there. Bring that stateside, partner with the right folks to make it happen. And there's a variety of RNG developers that are heavily diving into the space. I mean, Vanguard, exorbitantly so, deep pockets, as we mentioned, but other ones as well, very serious about the space, especially as Erica's mentioned, and as some people in the space have mentioned time and time again, the logical next step for RNG is CO2, especially when you reflect on the last few years of development, seeing financial models and pro forma, what they are in actuality, how can you optimize those sites, make them more cash flowing. CO2 kind of ticks all the boxes.
Fantastic. And you were saying just as we were coming up to the stage that given your background in the industry as well, it's great to see that this is finally gaining traction and overcoming any perception barriers as well.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to see. For context, I worked with Pentair, started on the brewing side, both with their QC and lab equipment group and their carbon capture group. So understanding the value of CO2 in those settings in the food and beverage sector, taking that knowledge into the RNG space and watching the waste stream, the tail gas stream that just pipe it to atmosphere and forget about it, make the project happen and make the gas the value, never really made sense. And while there have historically been people trying to connect the gap, it seems that now the momentum's starting to shift and there are people doing it. I mean, CleanCycle Carbon's got a site operating, monetizing CO2 off the back of an upgrader. There's the Denmark, Wisconsin site, famously known in the industry, and a host of others in the pipeline that should be following in the next couple of years to pioneer the way and really show the rest of the industry that it's possible, that last frontier being getting a good contract with an off-taker.
Absolutely. So Erica, big talk yesterday. I've referenced that a few times, but I was really encouraged by that. Big case studies that you showed us. I wondered if you could just recap some of those headlines around biogas and CO2. And I mean, you've got a huge footprint existing and emerging, basically.
Yeah, the biogas to CO2 market has been something that's been talked about for years. I mean, conversations that I've been having for 3-4 years now. And I think what is bringing it more to light are a couple of things. I think the strain that the CO2 market felt during COVID, I think that, as Ilir mentioned, the RNG market has softened. I think a lot of the projects, as you mentioned as well, operationally aren't performing to the way they were designed. And I think the RNG developers are now understanding that tail gas stream that's being emitted to the atmosphere is something else that can be monetized. It's kind of completing that circularity in these projects and closing that gap. So I think the time is ripe. I think we're proving now that these sites can pencil without government incentives. 45Q would be wonderful, but I think without being able to stack those credits with 45Z from RNG, on top of 45Q, that can make it a challenge. But I think at the fundamental core, we have to make sure these projects can stand on their own financially regardless. And we're proving that they can. And I think figuring out the right locations throughout the country as well, where supply for CO2 is strained, and strategically focusing our growth in those areas are really where we're seeing it make sense.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And could anything get in the way? Could anything hold this back?
What's that?
Could anything get in the way of this? Could anything hold it back?
I'm sure there could be things, lots of aspects. I think the industries have to work together. And I think there's a chicken and the egg concept. I think that RNG developers are open, CO2 off-takers are open, and I think it's just being the bridge between everyone and understanding that there is puzzle pieces that have to fall in place throughout the development and contracting process that are going to be different than what everyone's used to.
Okay, thank you. And Forrest, I'll frame this one slightly differently for you because I think we're coming at a different angle here. You're here in this panel. You've been very active in the Q&A and soaking up some insights, as we've alluded to. So why are you here? Why is your organization represented? And what's your kind of ambition or fit?
Yeah, so my goal is always to align with developers or operators, right? They have a goal to deploy capital. And a lot of times that discussion starts with, well, how much does it cost, right, to do this, right? How much is your package? How much is let's get to a metric. And I think what's very interesting in the CO2 space that maybe is analogous to some other developing spaces in the RNG that's more established is the question should be, how does the deployment of that capital get me to a better return or a better operating philosophy, right? And so our approach is we work with packagers that have a technology. We work with operators that need to deliver a spec product to the market. And then we say, where's the right expertise to support them in doing that? And in our space, that's how do we construct a facility and design it to meet the goals. In the carbon space and the projects we're doing, we're talking about carbon intensity metrics, right? Performance guarantee on the utility costs and usage for delivering a ton of CO2 to the market, because that affects 45Z. That can affect the operating costs. Is there a spec, right? So making sure all the packages work. And as we see the CO2 market develop from this traditional large gas industrial complex that has large sources, and we have smaller distributed, they need support around that, and that's where our firm plays with the CO2, the RNG. Power gen is somewhat similar, as Bloom alluded to. We have this large push right now in power gen. People are just throwing money at it to provide power. Well, there's a quality of that power when you're running a data center. They won't really recognize what that is until they're running it, just like what we're seeing maybe with the RNG facilities having a quality of product, and then the CO2 obviously meeting the quality of product. And so that start to finish is where we want to be part of that. And we help the clients or the packagers or the operators kind of fill in the holes and make it work. So it's very analogous to almost every industrial project that's happened in the States.
Okay, thank you. And what's been your most encouraging takeaway or insight?
I think the biggest insight I can see is that there's opportunities for new technologies to disrupt and maybe add value to a market that has traditionally maybe been very much commoditized. And so when you look at trying to add value, whether it's environmental attributes and what you're doing with the CO2 that you capture and where it's going, how it's going to be used, whether it's SAF and some demand development that comes there, or concrete, or the traditional liquid beverage market, I think clients are starting to look at more about the price. They're looking at reliability, distribution location. Trucking is a very big challenge. Pipelines, as we've alluded to, are not happening, right? That type of infrastructure project is just so immense. It's too much. If you stack that on the commercial agreements that the off-takers need, the technology kind of risk that is with some of these newer technologies, plus a supply agreement, stacking 4 areas of risk, the pipelines are certainly a challenge. So we're seeing more distributed, more trucking, and that means templated kind of repeatable projects instead of really big, massive ones where you can fix in the field and make them work. So I'm excited to see what comes with the disruption of the market a little bit with the new technologies and the new demand spaces.
Fantastic, thank you. And we heard a lot about that yesterday, of course. A question for the whole panel now. Erica, we've kind of alluded to this with you just a second ago, so we can skip this one for you if you like. But I'd like to ask the panel, what's the biggest barrier or challenge that you or your kind of market niche faces? I'll come to you first, Ilir.
I think the biggest problem, I think it's twofold. One, still the really small upgrading sites are difficult to pencil. And historically, a lot of the dairy sites that have been developed are quite small, and they just don't flow enough. The logistics are difficult. Landing a contract when you can't deliver daily is also difficult, right, for offtake. So there are some hurdles there, but as Erica alluded to yesterday, the contracting is kind of the big step for those developers, and actually finding some offtake that they can make some traction with. There are some offers that kind of put developers in the RNG space into a corner where they have to have the CO2 on hand, and the offtake is not actually guaranteed, right? And for them to deploy the capital and develop the CO2 side of the project, it just can't pencil out without a reliable source of offtake, right? We talk about reliable sourcing of CO2 as a consumer, but for these projects to pencil, they need a reliable source of that offtake. One thing I did want to circle back to just while I have the floor, a big thing about the RNG space that's interesting is in some cases, the methane slip on a system is so high that that can pencil the CO2 side, right? There are some projects in Canada that there are heavy taxes and such high methane loss that bringing the CO2 on, you can recirculate the methane that's being removed from the CO2 back to the upstream equipment. And so you regain that 10% of your revenue model back by deploying the CO2. So there are some creative things going on, but really monetizing the CO2 is the hard part. Putting it into an Excel sheet and making the business cases very easy. They pencil out on paper great. Actually getting it down to a term sheet and a contract is what's difficult for developers.
Sounds like some echoes with parts of the hydrogen market at the moment as well in terms of that offtake and that business case. Please do fire in the questions. I haven't seen any coming in yet, and we'll be pausing in a moment for the room's questions, so please send those in. Bruce, let's come to you. What, with that question, the biggest barrier or challenge that you think you see?
Ilir, totally agree with you. The biggest problem is so many sources are so small, it's very hard to pencil unless you have something like CI score reduction, and very valuable. CO2 capture is the single biggest thing you can do to lower your CI score. It comes at a substantial cost. But what scares me are really two things, I would say, Rob, is I don't think it's likely to happen, but the first plants will be very instructive. Everyone's going to be looking. If you stub your toe and the first ones have quality issues, and all of a sudden people get a perception, oh, this maybe it's not as safe and as good, and market acceptance dies. More likely, I think, though, the one that concerns me is I've talked to many plants that struggle to get the right substrate, the feed to these plants. Denmark, Wisconsin, they put in 120 tons a day of CO2 capacity. They're making 25 tons a day. Other plants I've seen, they expected to be running at 100% utilization. They're running at 35, 50% utilization. So you put in a CO2 plant, the model is built on this, and the companies who do this first, if they don't have a good return, the whole industry will get a black eye. To Vanguard, I'm sorry, I got distracted. I never finished my thought. Vanguard, the old regime in 2014, the original founders, eventually built 6 plants, all in New England, all on organic waste, because there are regulations in place, thou shalt recycle your waste. Well, it was never enforced. So when these people with the waste said, oh, I can get away with it, 2 of their plants of the 6 have been shut down so they can utilize and be more economic on the 4. So that's what I think is more likely. I don't think quality will be an issue, but could be.
I'll piggyback a little bit on Bruce's point. I think the key to a lot of these biogas plants is to implement the CO2 capture technology on the back of operating plants. Because you're right, a lot of the plants in the RNG space that are projected to make a certain biogas volume aren't hitting those nameplate capacities. And so if you're implementing and investing already in the substantial amount of investment for the RNG and then adding the CO2 system on top of that, it's just smarter to get your RNG plant operational, see what you're actually producing, and then add your CO2 system on behind it.
Fantastic, thank you. And again, slightly different angle, I think, Forrest, but what's the biggest challenge for a company such as yours?
Yeah, so I'd say similar to the first to the market and building confidence, it's very much like the helium space as we see people producing helium. You know, you really want to have success because that attracts capital investment improvements and adoption. So I think obviously the first plants coming out will need to hit the marks or temper kind of where they're trying to get to and instead of overpromising. And then when Bruce said regulation, I think that's the wild card, to be honest, in the CO2 space. We're seeing the policy change so dramatically, very quickly in the span of investments that need to pay off in 30 years. When we build a capital project, it is modeling off 30-year returns. And we're seeing policy change that's happening in the form of weeks and months and tweets, right? And so that is probably the biggest challenging aspect around the commercial part. That is just, is there a market? Will they buy it? And we can meet spec. I think those can all be answered and proven. It's really, is the regulatory there? I mean, in Colorado, we have projects that are happening because regulatory is pushing it, right? There is no commercial viability, but that will probably spur opportunity for that CO2 in the market because it will be a waste product that has been generated from that. So
absolutely, and this this notion around proof and reliability reminds me of something I thought Stephanie gave us a great one-liner in the last hour, that it's not just the tons produced, it's the trust delivered. So I think that applies to this whole changing face of CO2. We need that trust and the authority, and no stub toes. Let's move to our audience questions. I've seen 2 coming in, I think, so maybe we can get a bit of a snowball effect once we're up and running. Let's shift to these. So, Erica, the first one's for you. How has CleanCycle generated interest with such a large segment of developers?
Assuming we're talking about RNG developers in that space, if you saw my talk yesterday, you heard a little bit about our background. Our parent company is EFI USA. EFI has been in the biogas space and working with RNG developers for 20 plus years since the space originated. We have over 82% market share of the construction of covered lagoon digesters. So we've built a foundation of trust and relationships in the RNG space that CleanCycle is able to build off of.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question. We can start to tackle some of these as a panel, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So how many RNG developers do you see actively contracting for or building CO2 recovery liquefaction plants right now?
I think, Ilir, you can speak to your activities in the U.S. Maybe I can add a few more.
Yeah, stateside, actively contracting, it's slow. There are a handful that are pretty deep in negotiations for offtake with good success and momentum. There are a few that are contracting systems with us, engineering with us, so it's very real already. Really, the other 90% of it is the RNG developers that are interested, asking questions, coming back to explore the business case and really doing their development. I mean, their development curve is going to be long internally to figure out if it's the right decision for them. And it seems they're all kind of waiting for the foot to drop, with one to be a flagship recent example, something that they think they could replicate to give them a lot of confidence to deploy the capital. But to synthesize my answer, currently, few, with a massive backlog of interest, and everybody's watching the market right now.
I have one client that would have had a contract signed many months ago, if not for data centers. There was no power to power the expansion of the RNG plant or the CO2 capacity, so it's sitting on the sideline until they get the green light that the power is there to give the juice. So that will happen fairly rapidly. I've got other clients in addition to Vanguard. I do a little bit of work with Syntheca. I've been having some discussions recently with Amoresco, so I think I can never pronounce Canadivia. They've changed their name here recently, but I think several companies have interesting opportunities in good geographies with decent-sized plants that can make it economic. So I really hope by the time we're here next year, and you'll announce where soon, but I hope we have several projects in addition to Erica and the one up in Denmark. If not running, at least contracted and under construction.
Don't steal my thunder, Bruce. I'm saving that for you.
Whoops, slip of the tongue.
Now, we've talked about the CI score a little bit here. This next question, how much does CO2 capture improve the carbon intensity score per the ISCC? Who can take this question?
I believe it's about 25 points. So if you're typically around 50-ish, that will knock you down to 25. You've got to do other things to get down to negative, or IMO wants you to be, but that alone is a pretty good chunk to get you down there. And you've got tricks like fuel cells and things like that can advance the curve as well. And anyway, so yeah, a great start, for a reasonable investment.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good confirmation.
I got it.
That's
pretty
resonant
close.
with what I've seen.
Yeah.
20 to 30 is a general rule of thumb, 25 right in the middle there.
Okay, thank you. So are all RNG developers equally prepared to manage the risks around CO2 capture and offtake, or do you see major differences between them? We can take the whole panel's view here rather than one, it's fine.
Right. That's a really good question. Honestly, I think RNG developers are pretty well equipped to manage that. It's kind of a new venture for them. It's not the same as getting a grid interconnect and gas to grid and run the system. There's a lot that goes into it. And there's a lot of details of how much of the scope do you own, right? Do you just produce on site, have somebody pick it up and they pay you and that's when the ownership stops? Do you deliver to site, put up storage on the customer site, and you sell it as certified to ISBT spec? And, in theory, when the guidelines are published and people are starting to do that, do you deliver it as a product into your own tanks at their site and collect a higher premium due to absorbing more of the risk? So it's all a delineation of risk and what party wants to accept what. And I think RNG developers, when they're going into CO2, are a bit risk averse, and they'd rather just say, hey, if I can sell it on site and wash my hands and the project pencils out, that's more attractive than chasing down every possible CO2 consumer in a 100-mile radius of their site and endless phone calls trying to make it happen direct to consumer. So it depends on how they view it. I know there are some developers in the CO2 space looking at RNG that are willing to kind of take on that entire scope, go straight to customer, and that's their business model. Others are really favorable towards, we want as little risk as possible, just take our CO2, we monetize a waste stream, and people with more expertise do it. So there are ways to cut around the risk, and I think RNG developers are better equipped than they might lead on, but they're still tentative to step fully in.
Okay, thank you. A view that you guys would share?
I don't completely agree. I think RNG developers know RNG very well. They know how to get gas into a pipeline or into a CNG truck. I think you hit the nail on the head with being risk adverse. And I think there's also a lot of concerns in the industry on the safety aspect. And so making sure that there's a platform in place to make sure that the CO2 being produced, if it's going into the commercial market, that it's done safely. And I think that is paramount to what we're all doing in the industry.
Okay, great to get some healthy discussion here as well. Bruce, anything to add?
I apologize. I forget if it was Ilir or Erica who mentioned that because now the margins have compressed in RNG, there was no interest in CO2. I need to build 7 more plants next week. Get away from me with CO2. Now they're starting to look at existing assets. How can I squeeze the most value as I can with a minimal CO2 investment, or sell the raw gas and let the industrial gas company invest? So I think we're starting to see still many companies don't want to really touch CO2, but we're seeing companies that I've talked to for years had very modest, lukewarm interest. It is perking up quite a bit.
Fantastic, thank you.
And I think, Ilir hit the nail on the head as well with the methane return. I think a lot of the operational projects on the RNG side that have been operating for years now aren't seeing that methane recapture rate to where it should be. And I think that also helps the CO2 projects pencil, is that methane slip returning back to the front of the upgrader.
And Forrest, you seem to...
Yeah, I was going to say the RNG market isn't, it's unique, but there's qualities of it that are, I would say, you can look to other markets to see what might happen. So when you look at what Carbon Quest or maybe air capture is offering to non-RNG clients to say, hey, we'll take your emissions or we'll provide a product and we'll de-risk capital, that's really attractive in this market right now. Capital cost is very high. And so when you look at how do I de-risk capital, the challenge with RNG is RNG operators are very intelligent in taking a waste stream, turning it into a value product, and capturing environmental attributes from that. And if your product and your offering is mirroring that in CO2, they're naturally going to get very interested in understanding where the value is and trying to capture that for themselves. Whereas if you're working with I saw Cardinal, right? Glass is going into the CO2 capture space. They might not be interested in moving molecules, right? They want to make window panes. So they might be an easier client to have that value message, whereas an RNG client, they have a whole team at Vanguard that knows how to move molecules and sell them. They might want a piece of that pie, and that's where it starts to get a little messy, I think. And so maybe the big ones might want to stay away from, in the sense that they're gonna have a team that you're gonna have to compete with on the value prop, whereas a smaller one, we find, just make my pain go away, as Tomco alluded, right? What's the pain? Make it go away, and that is value there that you can bring to a smaller organization.
Absolutely, thank you. Good perspective to add to that one. Let's move quickly onto this. I think I'll come to you with this, Ilir. How far ahead of the US is Europe for this type of work?
Significantly so. I mean, you can't say infinite, but significantly so. And it's the case with renewables in general. 5+ years ahead of the curve sometimes. We kind of sit back and watch, and when it starts to look like it makes money, we'll adopt it. But in Europe, like I mentioned before, Bright, we have 20 liquefiers on RNG upgrading, and they're all selling the liquid CO2 into various spaces. Multiple of our systems are paired with some of the analytics systems that you see on the floor over there, selling into the beverage sector. So it's a very real thing, and it has been for years. So the States is, trying to get into it. It's kind of eagerly watching. And so when you look at US and Europe as well, you look at broader RNG industry. Development started there very, very heavily. Bright is part of a family of companies. One of our sister companies, Host Bioenergy Systems, develops digesters. They do CSTRs. And under the Host Group umbrella, who's founded in 1991, we've done 450 to 500 carbon neutral or carbon negative projects in this space. And in the US, we've only installed 37 upgraders. So slow moving in comparison, but I think the US and the figures that we saw, North America is the biggest market for CO2, right? So I think the volumes are here as well. It's just kind of connecting the dots, and there's no reason why we couldn't catch up or even surpass.
Exactly, we've got a blueprint and the lessons to learn, so that's a good head start. Okay, I've got 2 questions left. I'm going to save one till the end, if I may. Given how dependent many projects are on 45Q, does anyone here see a strategy to build CO2 plants that isn't tied to that incentive? Who wants to take that one? I'm thinking Bruce or Forrest, perhaps.
Vanguard's model is built without 45Q. If it comes, it's just an added bonus if we can bundle. So that is a possibility that you could bundle multiple sources together and hit that 12,500 metric ton. But Erica's a case in point.
Yeah, same. I mean, our North Carolina plant wasn't dependent on 45Q. It's too small to qualify, and a lot of the biogas projects, even outside of landfill, will not qualify based on the size alone. I think you have to be able to build these plants without 45Q.
Yeah, I mean, all we ever hear about is 45Q, so it's great to hear that there will be a strategy beyond that as well.
The challenge with 45Q, though, is if you're not building with the mindset to capture 45Q, then you'll have to pay penalties, right, on your apprenticeship ratios and your prevailing wage, right? So there's ways you have to build your facilities in a manner that will allow you to recognize that 45Q opportunity if it does come, which is very much, in our space, when we talk to a client, how do we risk mitigate the fact that there's these requirements, and we've had clients that have built sites and then go, oh, we want the 45Q now, right? Well, that is much more painful than kind of planning ahead and trying to mitigate that risk. So I'd say when you're planning to execute, you want to definitely have all your paperwork and your audit trail ready for that 45Q permission.
Great point, because our next site will qualify for 45Q. So we are doing exactly that.
Yeah.
So that if and when 45Z does expire and it doesn't get extended, we are able to toggle and monetize 45Q. just not building the financial model to require it.
Yep.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, I've seen a couple of questions come through. This was due to be my final one. There's a reason for that. I wanted to frame this up a little bit. I've heard a few sources across the last couple of days, and I won't name them, suggesting there isn't a CO2 problem, that it is there, it's around. So that brings us to this question, really. Does the panel share the same lack of near-term market confidence as you expressed yesterday, Bruce?
Well, I guess I'm a terrible communicator because I'm confused as to how negative. I thought I was pretty neutral, just saying before we had CCS and all the other prevailing factors in 45Q, the industry always had sources going away. It's nothing new or unusual. And I'm not saying the market is going to turn radically. So if I misspoke, I stand corrected. But let's assume I painted a negative picture and hear what these panelists think about the near term.
I didn't hear the negative picture from you.
Thank you. I feel better.
No, I mean, it's clear that this year is flat, but there's still so much uncertainty as some of the sequestration wells come online, what's going to happen to a lot of these ethanol plants and the CO2 associated with them. So this year will be flat, but there's a lot of uncertainty and volatility, I think, ahead.
Okay, and any other views on this?
Yeah, I think they've hit the nail on the head. Just because it's a stable year doesn't mean it's going to be a stable year forever, and a stable market's not always a bullish market, right? So I don't necessarily think that Bruce's take was overtly negative at all. I think he's calling into question the fact that we all have to be at least somewhat speculative and aware of the possible risks. You can't just charge into the future, blissfully unaware, hoping for the best, because if you don't plan for contingency, then you suffer from any sort of constriction on the market. So my take on the talks that we've had that have centered on this topic are more that, you know, we're hopeful for the future, but we're all aware and we should be looking at the data and just take it as it comes. So I don't think I would personally have a negative outlook or a positive outlook, just an aware one, and play it realistically as it comes.
Absolutely. And Forrest, anything to add?
I would say that probably prior to any regulatory changes, right, CO2 was looked as a waste stream with little value of emitting to a product if you could deliver ISBT grade. I think that's changing, right? That waste is no longer a tragedy of the commons perspective, which means it's going to have a value assigned to it, which just means people are going to do things to capture that value or mitigate that risk. And that's probably going to be the biggest disruption, I think, to the supply in the traditional pathways. For example, when we talk to a client about building an injection project, you know, we also talk to them about, well, what's the other modes of transport that you might want to do with this CO2 should that go away? And I think a lot of them are thinking about that. I think Europe, you've seen massive sequestration projects starting to come online. The one, I think Norway or someone there, I'm not as familiar, but I still think we're going to have this big driver, as air capture alluded to removing CO2 from our environment and making it a waste cost, as well as demand going up for it in a general industrial application. So those two things are going to play, which means a little bit of chaos is good, means opportunities for folks to come up with new ideas, new market, and disrupt maybe some of the larger established pathways that have been there.
Sure, thank you. And Bruce, not to labour this point, but just to clarify, do you think maybe sometimes the market can lend itself to some mixed messaging in terms of, you know, this roller coaster of shortage and stability and back to shortage? And you know, we find the message in Nashville 12 months ago at this event was actually things are good. I think you said as well the majors had managed to navigate the market and avoid any major disruption, which was a very positive note. And yet we could also find a few people in the room that would say, "Whoa, I'm on allocation. What are you talking about?" So can this kind of mixed messaging be created?
I think that's an excellent point, that it's probably very personal, right? What's happened? If you're in California and you've got an outage today, you're on allocation or at least have a surcharge in place, yeah, you're going to view it very differently than if you're in the Midwest and you just got a price decrease because 3 or 4 people came in with very nice competitive quotes. So it's probably very regional, very personal. And again, I did not mean to convey gloom and doom that the worst is happening, other than California is the one place that does have the potential for a significant crisis, especially if Valero closes as it's intended now, but that could change. And this industry always changes so quickly. Ethanol looked like it was in some very tough shape. Margins were so bad, and even with corn at a low price. But now this 45Z looks like it will be a huge benefit, and that tide will lift all ethanol ships, and they'll benefit from it. So things do change.
Yeah.
Policy can drive what happens in the market.
Well, let's draw a line under that particular area of the discussion then, and let's remember this is the Newcomers and New Opportunities Panel, and we'll use this final question to get us back onto that kind of track. Unfortunately, it's for you again, Bruce. Is Vanguard currently building a CO2 plant at any of its RNG sites?
The short answer is no, because they only have 3 plants under construction. We thought about jumping into it and trying to bolt it on and doing it, but we were a little bit late. They have so much going on. Even with 250 members of Vanguard Renewables now, it was a stretch to build all these plants, develop the new sites, add CO2 on top of it. The decision was made, let's wait probably 3 to 6 months before we have to commit, because those plants do not have the IMO need. So CI reduction was not going to help economically. It would have just been a pilot. And I sort of advocated, why are we doing this? We're only going to gain 3 months, so your pilot is not very valuable for having a low margin project. So,
okay, thank you for clarifying that one. So I'm conscious of the clock, so let's move to some concluding thoughts now, and we'll go around the panel with this one. So I'd like to ask what you would like to see from this industry or from those in this room, and essentially, what do we need to do next as the first kind of closing question, Forrest?
I guess, our perspective is we help people really deploy capital, and they have their business models to deliver the product or to monetize it with their commercial offtake agreements. I'd say there's a lot of expertise in the room. There's a lot of new expertise coming in, right, and new players. I think the projects are best served if you have a team of experts helping you do what you need to do, whether it's commercial exposure to the market and understanding where things are going, regulatory, permitting, operations, construction. And so make sure that when you pull together your team to do it, I think challenge kind of the status quo and ask what's the right way to do this with the right people to meet the market demand and try to push to differentiate. And I think that's where you're going to find opportunity. And I think there's a lot of great technology out here, a lot of distributors that are pushing the envelope as well. So I think that's where I would ask and challenge the group.
Fantastic, thank you. Bruce, we will be in New Orleans, or if I correct my native tongue, New Orleans, in 12 months' time. So what message would you like to leave in terms of, where do we pick up the baton in 12 months' time of these talking tracks?
Frankly, I think the most important thing is the outlook of the major gas suppliers, and are they willing to invest capital in new CO2 plants, be it 6 small RNG plants, be it one big low purity source. There's not many conventional ones left, and for so long, the capital was all going into hydrogen. There was no capital or bandwidth left. The organization had abandoned CO2 at most of the majors. So fortunately, the policy change had an unintended consequence of helping the CO2 industry. So that's what I think is the key thing. And obviously by developing new sources, making it available, providing the financing if they don't want to self-finance, that helps move the needle in the right direction of avoiding the crises which shrunk the CO2 demand for several years.
Fantastic. And we'll come to you next. Ilir, what are your final takeaways, final messages for our audience?
Yeah, I think for me, I would ask that people stay curious and stay open-minded. I think at this stage of the game, it's important for us as an equipment supplier trying to push the envelope in the space, and others like CleanCycle Carbon kind of being at the forefront of this development. The industry as a larger organization and group of people, I think, keep your eyes on us, learn about our technology, learn about the purity of the CO2, learn about what's actually going on behind the scenes and what we're really working on, because our goal isn't just to develop some projects and get paid. It's really to bring biogenics to the forefront of the market and make it a viable player in the constituents that make up the CO2 supply, right? I mean, the name of the game, particularly for Bright and host group, is decarbonization, utilizing everything you can from a waste stream. So I think as people are more curious and ask more questions and plainly give me an opportunity to yap on and on about everything biogenic and RNG, I think information is power here, and getting everybody well up to speed is a key step.
Fantastic, thank you. And Erica, I chose to come to you last because you told me yesterday you've got a connection to New Orleans. So perhaps you could share your final view with a view to that event in 12 months' time.
Yes, I am actually a New Orleans native, was born and raised there, and thrilled to learn that that's where this conference will be next year. Beignets, Mardi Gras beads, hurricanes, all of it. It'll be a lot of fun. But I think what I'm most excited about and what I hope is continuing to evolve in the next 12 months is this openness that Ilir mentioned. I think, understanding that what we are doing is groundbreaking, we are doing it safely. And I think there's been, what I heard last year compared to this year was there was so much concern about the safety and the nervousness about these alternative sources. And I think there is a way to do it safely. We're doing it. You saw the letters from Airborne, who was tremendously respected in this space. We have ASTG equipment coming in as well for our permanent analyzer. And I think there is that path there. So from a contracting standpoint and from offtake, I think that's where I hope to see continued progress is in those relationships, in that flexibility and that open-mindedness of contracts, because that is all critical to make these projects work.
Fantastic, thank you. And we hope we'll see you there in a year's time. We hope we'll see the whole panel and everyone in the room there in a year's time. That does bring this panel discussion to an end. I'd like to thank you once again. You've been listening to Bruce Warner, representing Vanguard Renewables, Erica Chase of CleanCycle Carbon, Ilir Tahiri of Bright Renewables, and Forrest Churchill of CANUSA. So let's give them all a final round of applause, please.
Well, Tom, I have to say, current Rob is as happy with that panel as past Rob was.
Yeah, it's come out sounding really good, hasn't it? So many talking points there, some great audience interaction with the questions there. Great to get into those poll results that were running through the event as well.
Yeah, I love that. Always love to see those shifting as you bring them up on screen. So, I think that's a lot of great value there delivered. And in terms of those poll results, listeners, please do take part in our question of the day polls that take place on the gasworld website every weekday.
Yeah, really worth voting in those and sharing your opinion on so many of the hot topics, and will help to drive what we're covering and the content that we bring in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That market sentiment is key. So yeah, continue to shape it.
Well, Rob, we have a flight to catch in just a few hours' time, so we should get a move on. Of course, we're going to
Another one.
Austin, Texas for our Helium Super Summit. So keep an eye out for another event review. Might be able to get 2 or 3 episodes out of that.
And we're going to the track, Tom, aren't we? We're going to go to the race.
To the track, yes. Kept that quiet on the podcast, but cannot wait for the Grand Prix in Austin at the Circuit of the Americas. I think we could do a whole episode about that, but maybe this isn't the platform.
Yeah, we'll stick to the topic. Yeah.
In the meantime, do please like, follow, and share the 1895 podcast, and we'll be back again next week.
This message is proudly sponsored by CO2 Meter.